Welcome everybody. I'm Demitrius Nelon. I'm a product manager at Microsoft and I work primarily on Winget. Not everybody in here has used it or heard of it, I'm going to assume, so I'm going to give you a quick primer here. A few years back we did a bunch of research with developers. We asked them kind of what their top pain points were. They told us, number one, it's terrible when my internal wiki is outdated or the instructions for me getting my environment set up are wrong or just non-existent. Number two, we were told that building and compiling code is slow. And number three, getting a Windows environment set up was hard. So we knew at that point in time we had some real heavy lifting to do. And we started out with package management. Linux world has had this for several decades. The idea is you have a command line experience. So instead of going to the internet and opening up web pages and trying to figure out where the download link is and installing stuff, we wanted to make it easy for you so you could just type something in your console and just have it happen and safely download, safely install the right software for you. The next thing that we looked at was getting into configuration as code. We did our initial release of that based on PowerShell's desired state configuration product. And with our most recent release, we have added support for Microsoft desired state configuration, which is the third generation of that technology. So today I'm going to cover what's new in Winget. I'll kind of go over the high-level feature set over the last year. We'll talk about what getting started with configuration as code looks like, and then we'll get into some of the key takeaways. So if I go back to what's happened, we'll kind of look back at last year's Ignite. We did a release after that in February, and we had added intra-ID support for the private Winget resources. So today when Winget ships, it comes with 3 sources. Previously there were only 2. There was the Microsoft Store and the community repository. And we heard a lot of feedback from enterprise customers. Hey, we don't want our employees installing things from the store or installing them from who knows what application from the community repository. So we built a REST source and we added more enterprise control on top of that. So you can lock down what sources are configured and you can require intra-ID authentication. We did some other performance improvements for AOT, which is kind of a ahead of time compilation to make ourselves a little smaller of a footprint and more performant. And we did a lot of back-end infrastructure work on our COM APIs that anybody can interface with. That's actually how our PowerShell modules integrate with Winget. And that's the same way that a lot of other third-party applications have been doing as well. It's really kind of getting us more into what I would say is an enterprise-ready state. Most enterprise customers are familiar with PowerShell. Then with Winget 1.11 in June, and this was kind of right around the time for Microsoft Build, we did the initial release with Microsoft desired state configuration. We added a capability to export the local configuration, and we implemented our first DSC v3 resources in Winget. And I'll go into a little bit more about those configuration as code terms here in a few minutes. The latest release that we just shipped a couple of weeks ago includes support for fonts and managing those. We've added a group policy for that so that you can, again, control that. There's a new font source for it. We did our initial MCP server implementation. We've also got a policy so that you can lock that down as well. And we did a modification for the app installer. We migrated that to WinUI and using the Windows App SDK just to kind of modernize that technology stack. And if I look at kind of our pattern and look at things going forward, we tend to release Winget with different themes in mind. Our February release is generally craft, usability, fitness, bugs. You know, a lot of those little annoying paper cuts types of things is what we want to tackle in an early in the year release. Then in June, we're going after sort of the core developer features. Those are things that are going to coincide with what we're doing with Ignite and kind of where our charter lives with making things better for developers. And then in October, it's a shift to the enterprise focus, looking at control, looking at things like some of the problems and challenges with trying to operate Winget in the system context and other things that take quite a bit longer to ship and update in the operating system. So I'm going to go ahead and get my device warmed up here, and we will switch over to some demos. And of course, the remote device went to sleep, so let me get that reconnected. All right, so here we are in Windows Terminal, and Windows Terminal is really where all of the things I do with Winget typically live. So the first thing I'm going to show you is the new source. So the Microsoft Store has been there, the Winget community repository has been there, but the new one is this font source. And you'll notice something different on this one. We've added a column on the right that is explicit. And what that means is we're talking about the targeting or how Winget operates on a source. We've had this concept, and this is kind of the first time we've shipped a new source with it. But essentially, we don't want to be downloading all these indexes on the devices all across the planet if they're not going to be using this feature. So this allows us to explicitly target, but you can change that setting. So the first thing I'm going to show you is the font functionality. So if I do a Winget search and say I'm looking for the 𝗦𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗶cie font, you'll notice at the end I've got the -S Winget font. That's specifying that source. And we should see one result. It's one of the two things that's in there. And just like I would normally do, I can install it by the ID. So I will go ahead and just copy and paste the ID there. Love that it picked up Microsoft Power Toys for me. This is going to do the same things that you would expect with a normal package. We're going to go out, fetch the manifest. We're going to pull it down, analyze it. We're going to download whatever the binary happens to be. We're going to do the 𝗦𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗶𝗃 check to make sure that the file hasn't been tampered with. And then we're going to go through the install process. Fonts are a little bit different in Windows. A lot of the operating bits that talk to or touch the fonts are fairly old. There's a notion of fonts being installed for users. There's a notion of fonts being installed for administrators. And if I do Winget list font, I'm just searching on the word font, which is a substring of anything. We should see this 𝗦𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 font being installed. And one of the things that you can notice that's fairly distinct is under the ID column, you're not seeing a package identifier. You're seeing this font / user / and then the package identifier. That's part of the technique that Winget is using to install the fonts so that we can differentiate them from fonts that are installed in the system by default or fonts that are installed by other applications like Windows Terminal. One of the other fonts that we have is an accessibility font, and it's got a font in it called 𝗦𝗃𝗀. So I'm just going to pull up the control panel here on the side so that you can see what happens. I'm going to do a Winget search. And we're going to look for Fluent, which I happen to know is the identifier in this case. It's a Fluent font that we offer. And you can see that version 1 is available. Now if I do the Winget install, I'm going to do this using sudo so that I can install this as an administrator to show the difference there. A little more copy and paste. So the full command is there with the -S Winget fonts. When I hit enter, I'm getting the user account control prompt for doing this elevated. We'll see that font will get installed. We should see the number of fonts increase in the control panel as that happens. So you can see the new font faces were installed. Now if I do the list on the fonts, we'll see both the user installed font and the administrator installed font that I just added in the list. Some of the other applications in here, and part of the reason I didn't filter it down to just fonts, if you look at the bottom one, you can see 𝗦𝗽𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗶cie. There's a tag in its package that is referring to fonts, and it's an identifier. The other things that may not look familiar are the ARP/ and the MSIX/ for these other package identifiers. That's generally an indication that this package is installed on the system, but there's no source that's wired up without explicit targeting for it. You can still use these identifiers to uninstall packages, but you would not be able to use them to install packages. So that pretty much covers what we've got for fonts. Would love some feedback on that. Here in the next week or two, we will start opening up submissions at the community repository so that folks can start adding the fonts that they want to use. And we'll have plenty of other documentation on how to go in and manage those fonts, including adding those to your private sources for those of you in enterprises that want to be able to control and manage those. So we'll switch back to the presentation now. and we're going to switch gears into configuration as code. This is kind of really addressing those problems I mentioned earlier. We knew before we got into trying to automate the configuration of a Windows environment that we had to have a package manager first, so that was a prerequisite. And now we're starting to see some real maturity happening in the configuration as code space. So this is the AI part of my presentation and the AI part of my demo. I just asked Copilot to describe and define configuration as code. Fortunately, it did get it right. The main benefits that we're seeing out of configuration as code is I can check these things into source control. I've got some auditability and some traceability there. We can do peer review on it and kind of double check it. Configuration as code is very powerful. The new things that were released with Microsoft desired state configuration, which is different from PowerShell desired state configuration, is we no longer have that explicit dependency on PowerShell and you having to build the resources that are the things that change configuration in C#. You can now build them in any programming language, doesn't matter what it is. It's just essentially handling JSON lines over standard I/O. JSON lines is not quite the same thing as JSON. It's a compressed format, not really human readable, but you can make it pretty by controlling the output. We also included several adapters for the existing PowerShell resources. There's a bunch of what we would say is like the PowerShell DSE 1.1 MOF-based resources, plenty of PowerShell 2 based resources that are class-based. You would typically, in PowerShell, say something like invoke DSE resource to call them. And now with DSE v3, we have things built into the application. So now I don't have to pull a separate binary down. The application itself handles the configuration. The other nice benefit with this is it's essentially AI ready because it's a command line interface. Large language models can pretty quickly figure out what these things are and talk directly to them if you give them permissions to. Several resources have been built. All of the ones I'm aware of are open source. 𝗦𝗲𝗀𝗶𝗶cie did 𝗦𝗽𝗲𝗀𝗶cie, which is the pretty prompt that I've been using on my screen. We'll go into that one. PowerToys and all of its PowerToy utilities have also been implemented. We implemented the ones in Winget. Those were done in C++, which was one of the more interesting ones. Winget create was done in C#. But you notice 𝗦𝗽𝗲𝗀𝗶𝗶cie was done in Go. And that's sort of an unusual thing to see for something coming out of Microsoft and being nice and graceful and interoperating well. When I go look and I see at how people are using configuration as code, the .NET tutorial, the Hello World in 5 minutes, is probably the best simple example for you. Instead of go to this website, download this thing, click a bunch of buttons and a bunch of screenshots, you're literally downloading a YAML file that has a .winget extension. Winget is going to install Visual Studio Code, it's going to install the workload for .NET, and it's going to install the .NET tool. And if we dig in and take a quick peek at the file, it's just YAML, it's human readable. It's not a script, it's not branching logic or conditional behavior. It's just a declarative file that describes what the environment should look like when the configuration is applied. We've built several sample configuration files primarily for developer workloads. We do have some examples for using individual resources, but all of the different development technologies and environments we've got samples for at the link aka.ms/winget-samples. And if you want to add more, it's open source. We'd love to take those contributions in because we know it's a lot easier to start from a working configuration than it is necessarily to go from scratch. So when we talk about building a configuration file, the experience up to date has been you're going to launch your favorite YAML editor. I happen to like VS Code, but a lot of people have their favorites. You're going to start typing. You're going to try to run the validation on it. You're going to go have to debug it and rinse and repeat. Hey, we hear you. Building these files is not easy. You're wanting to know, like, what is this DSE resource thing? Where can I find them? How do I use them? What are all the properties and settings? And just in general, a lot of people don't like editing large structured data formats by hand. So let's switch over into demo mode here. Bring my main PC back up again. So let me clear this out for you. back on the local machine. So I'm going to run winget configure export all. I'm going to switch to my desktop first. This is going to tell Winget, export everything on the system, every installed application that you know about. It's going to grab one of those PowerShell class-based resources for the Windows settings so that it can grab the Windows settings. It's going to take a look at all of the installed applications. If any of them have implemented DSCV3, we'll also export all of those settings for all of those applications. We'll include all of that in the same configuration file. And from there, you can take that file to another device, whether it be a remote machine. Doesn't even have to be the same architecture. Most applications now have both ARM64 and x64 variants. So this works as a cross-platform logical backup that you can go apply to another device. So it's a pretty powerful set of technologies. We're just now starting to see some real traction with third-party applications and going in and tackling some of our own challenges with things like Windows settings and File Explorer settings, things like that in the operating system. Those will take some time because of the long lead time of doing that engineering work, but the plan is to be able to have everything that you can set up and configure on Windows available through this technology and make it where you can actually go in and do other command and control behaviors. One of the things I'd love to get some feedback on, please go to the open source repositories for these. Let us know when you're looking at something like this, would you prefer to have signed configuration files and control this through certificates? What other kinds of policy mechanisms would you want? Today, you can get full supply chain control by standing up a private Winget REST source, locking group policy down to that, doing the same thing for your PowerShell interfaces to go to either your artifact repository or Azure Container Registry or whatever you're using there. So you can do full supply chain control, but it still is a bit onerous. So we'd love to get your feedback on that. This configuration is almost done exporting. You can see that we're going through all of the Power Toys since I have that installed. And as soon as this finishes up, I'm going to go ahead and open up this configuration file. We've been doing some work internally. It's an experiment that we're doing, looking at is there a better way than just the structured file to go work on these Winget configuration files? So we've got an experimental tool called Winget Studio. I'm going to open that up and we'll take a look at this file. I'll go through that and kind of show you some of the things that we've been working on and where some of our challenges are with desired state configuration. Some of the times you'll see the performance on these is a little bit slower than others. That's normally when you're running one of the PowerShell-based resources. There are some things we're going to do to speed that up. Most of these others are quicker because you're actually calling the application. So in this case with PowerToys, we've got an executable that's handling the standard I/O with the JSON lines to give us all of the data. And this is pretty much everything in PowerToys with the exception of the secrets for Mouse Without Borders. Now we're getting into my Winget Create settings. We're getting into 𝗦𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗏, which is the prompt that I like that has the coloring and all of the nice controls to it. After that, we should be just about finished. These demos always take longer when I'm on stage. It's pretty fantastic when I try to time them. Okay, so let's open up this configuration file. And it was the one on my desktop called export. If I open up this configuration file, I can still go in and look at the code view that is essentially all of that raw YAML that was exported. And you can see if I go all the way to the bottom of it, we've got nearly 1,300 lines of configuration that were generated just with that one command. If I wanted to go in and edit this configuration, I can go in to the edit mode. I can look at each one of these resources, and I've got a larger view of this that I'll show you an example. So this one is essentially just ensuring that PowerShell 7 is installed. If I hit validate, it'll pull me to a different view in the user interface where I can go see what's going on. Desired state configuration has three primary operations that most people are familiar with: get, set, and test. What get does is it pulls back the values for the things you've asked for. It really wasn't designed like get everything. It was really designed like, hey, I have this setting. I want to see if the system is in the desired state. And I'm going to go ahead and click get on this one and let that start doing its work. When we call set, we're saying I want to change the state of the device. I want it to conform to whatever values or settings I've specified. One of the performance benefits with desired state configuration is we actually run test first, so that if the system is already in the desired state, we don't make any changes. And ideally, all of these operations are idempotent, so that you can run them over and over again and they're non-destructive. So if you look at the results on the right-hand side, you'll see that we've got an exist is set to true. Anything with the leading underscore is one of those special properties for desired state configuration. You can see the version of PowerShell that's installed on my system, the ID, the Winget source, and there's a property in there that says use latest true. That has to do with whether or not Winget believes the latest version of the application is installed. But if you didn't know any of those things and you wanted to figure it out, when you've got a particular resource specified up here in the top, you can hit the information button and we'll actually pull up all of the information about all of the settings that are available. And since this one is a v3 resource, we can go view the JSON schema. This is going to define all of the properties that are supported. You're going to get a human readable description of them if this has been filled out correctly. In some cases, you'll be able to see that the data types might be an enumeration as opposed to a string or a number. This is very helpful information that if you're not familiar with the resource to begin with, it's going to help you figure out how to use it. And if I go in and I select copy as YAML, I'm going to go ahead and wipe out everything I've got in my settings and paste in the value that I copied out. I get a lot of the default values for the resource that's there. One of the ones I will call out is on line 7, we've got use latest and the false is in quotes. That's a bug. We're going to get that fixed. It should just be false without quotes. It is a Boolean value. Let's say you wanted to configure something like Visual Studio Code. I can go into the tool and I can just start searching, and you'll notice on the right-hand side of this top result for the VS Code extension, it's coming from the PowerShell gallery. Even if this resource is not installed on my system, I can go ahead and pull down the information for that one. This resource is one of those class-based PowerShell resources. You'll notice on the right we don't have the schema. We have a bunch of what looks like code properties, but we do have all of the different settings on the left. And if I wanted to really dig in, if you go into the view, the code view on this, you'll actually get to see the PowerShell code that defines this resource. Again, this can be very helpful when you're trying to figure out what are the settings and the properties that are allowed. Are there regular expressions constraining the valid values or not? It gives you a lot of that kind of information, which is something that's just been missing and been a real challenge from a discovery standpoint. I will note, in this case, I do have the resource installed on my system, so I could go in and run export or set or test. But if it wasn't installed and I went to use it, Winget Studio would throw an error. You currently have to manually install these to make sure that they're there, or you can use the configuration structure that we use in Winget to do that from the export. So if I go back to manage a configuration file, I can see this transitional unit, and I'll go ahead and bring this one over into the edit view since it's larger. This is how Winget is ensuring that this resource is actually installed. And if I scroll over to the right, you'll notice this is just some command line syntax calling PowerShell. And all it's really doing is just making sure that this module is installed before this configuration is run. When you're running a hybrid configuration and you're mixing the earlier V2 resources and the newer V3 resources, you need to make sure that they're installed on the system. They don't just come for free. We're working on a process that will do that, but it's still one of those challenges. The other thing that's nice is if I wanted to clean this up and just narrow it down to a smaller collection of things, and you can see it's pretty large, I can easily go in and I can just do a delete action and remove those resources one at a time. And we've got things that you would expect like save and save as. For Ignite, what I've done is I've pulled down an export. I've modified a configuration file, made it a little bit simpler. I'm going to go ahead and pull that one up now so that we can take a look at it. If I go back into the edit view and look, we'll see that I'm installing the latest version of PowerShell. I am turning on some experimental features in Winget. I'm giving myself my rainbow progress bar and sixels, which is the 6-pixel images that I'll show you in a minute. I've got my administrator settings where I am enabling local manifest files. And you'll notice on this one there's a shield. That's an indication that this resource needs to run elevated. If you run a Winget configuration file and something needs to be elevated, the user will have to be able to accept that UAC prompt. But the only things that get run in the configuration are those things that are elevated. Just like we saw before with the earlier one with Windows settings, this is the resource that's pulling that module down. I'm going in and setting my system color mode to dark, enabling developer mode. In this one, I'm moving my taskbar alignment left, and I'm setting it to dark for my application color mode. We're pulling in Windows Terminal, making sure we've got the latest version of that. Pulling in 𝗦𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗶cie, configuring it. I actually use the default prompt. It can actually pull in its own font. So in this case, 𝗦𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 is installing 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 code, the nerd font version that I need with all the power line glyphs and the extra things so that I have the fancy icons. And it knows about me having this configured in PowerShell 7. So I'm going to take this configuration file and I'm going to copy it over to a Microsoft Dev box. And when we get into the Microsoft Dev box, I do have quite a few things installed here to try to save us as much time as possible, not having to stare at scroll bars and watching progress happen. But if I go in, you'll see I've got the normal plain prompt. I don't have my fancy prompt. If I do a winget show command for VS Code, this is going to have Winget go take a look at what's in the repository and show me some of the metadata and which installer I would use. You'll notice there's no graphics, there's no icons, and the progress bar was just the standard blue progress bar. So let's go ahead and open up the configuration file for the demo. We walked through it on the other device, so we've seen what this is going to do. I'm going to hit the validate button. This is essentially just doing a logical check on the configuration file to make sure that it doesn't have circular dependencies, it doesn't have anything that is incorrect in terms of the schema for the configuration syntax. And in this case, it actually knows how to check in many of the resources themselves, which is something Winget can't do by itself with Winget Validate. If I were to run test, it would look at the entire configuration. It would look at everything that's in it. It would compare that against what is configured in Windows. And it would tell me if the system is in the desired state or not, which is a nice utility if you're looking for drift. You can also run export looking for drift and see if applications were installed that aren't a part of your configuration, which is something that's new. But in this case, I'm just going to apply the configuration. We'll see the standard big scary warning, hey, this can do anything to your system. Make sure you know where the configuration file is coming from and what it's doing. When I hit apply, I'm going to get a single UAC so that it can run the resources elevated that it needs to run elevated. Everything else gets run in the user context that the configuration was kicked off in. So while we're going through some of these progress bar and just kind of watching things turn green and succeed, I'll cover a little bit about the challenges that we've been running into with some of the configuration as code things, just so you know where they are. This is really, really powerful. There aren't as many resources out there as you would want. If you're trying to configure something really sophisticated like SQL Server or Office, there are some complex resources out there, but they're going to have a steep learning curve. They're going to be very domain specific. The odds of you just saying, hey, I've got a thing, I know I want to configure it, I'm going to go find the resource that does it, it's going to be hit or miss. This is going to be something that's going to take some time for Microsoft and for independent software vendors to go implement DSC and to build more resources. The good news is you do have an escape hatch, so to speak. There is a run command on set, which will allow you to go in and run arbitrary executables and pass arguments to them. You can do things like go edit registry keys. So if this is something that you really need to buy that time, we do have the ability to go do that. And if you file an issue on the GitHub repository about it, we'll help you, or somebody else from the community is also very likely to help you with this. There is a desired state configuration community that's been around for several years, and they've got lots of resources in the PowerShell gallery that are available for you to pull down and use to build these configuration files with. And as a community, we're really starting to get a lot of good progress and a lot of momentum. So you'll see on my configuration, it hit the part where it switched to dark mode and moved my taskbar to the left. And as we're running the configuration now, it's installed 𝗦𝗽𝗲𝗀𝗶cie. It's done the basic configuration for the prompt. It's now using 𝗦𝗽𝗲𝗀𝗶cie to install the font. The last thing it's going to do is configure the shell. And this is essentially going into my PowerShell profile and telling it how to invoke 𝗦𝗽𝗲𝗀𝗶cie so that I get that pretty prompt. So now when I open up my terminal, we should see something different than what we saw before. In this case, we can see I've got my prompt. This is something that I've been wanting to have happen for probably 2 years now at least. There are a couple of glyphs that are not wired up, and this is one of our other challenges. With Windows Terminal, the settings in Windows Terminal can depend on the shell that you have installed. So in this case, for PowerShell, in order for me to have PowerShell configured and to have the font wired up for that in the appearance, PowerShell has to have a way to tell me in desired state configuration language that it's got a dependency on another application. So we're working on a proof of concept for that so that we can pull that out. But now if I go in, I can see I've got my 𝗦𝗽𝗀𝗀𝗶𝗀𝗀 nerd font. And when I save that and I go back and I take a look at my prompt, now I've got my glyphs back. I probably could have done that with a script resource and hand-coded that bit of work out, or copied over the configuration file for Windows Terminal, but sometimes getting 80% of the way there with a configuration file is already going to save me a lot of time. When we originally built the first version of Winget Studio, it was an intern project, and we set them up for success. We had the entire configuration checked into source control, and it was a Winget configuration file that knew how to install full-blown Visual Studio and knew how to go enable developer mode, make sure that all of the extensions and workloads were present. It could even go in and clone the repository when we built that originally, but we pulled that out. Most people prefer to manage cloning repositories on their own. We added configurations for all of the SKUs of Visual Studio. So there's a community version, a pro version, and an enterprise version. So you can literally change your workflow as a developer from go find the README and then go find the contributing file, and then hopefully the instructions are up to date, to fork the project at GitHub, clone it on your local device, run the Winget configuration, launch your IDE and hit F5. I don't know how many of you started a new job or a new project and got your environment all set up the first day that you started, but it's a pretty magical experience. Once you get that, you won't want to go back. And for those of you that are losing days or weeks of time onboarding new employees, this can be a real lifesaver. So the other thing I'll do now is I will do a Winget show on VS Code so that we can actually see that my Winget settings were also applied, and that was done using the v3 resource that was there. So it actually used Winget to call DSC to go back and call Winget itself again to do this configuration. This is really a magical experience, and it's been a great time saver for us. So now I'm going to go back to presentation mode and talk a little bit about some of the key takeaways here. So configuration as code, phenomenal. It is really powerful, but there's not as many resources out there as we want. So my call to action for you would be, if you've got things that you're building, line of business applications, start looking at implementing DSC in those. we're happy to help you with it. Winget Studio could be a good way for you to do some manual testing and validation. If you've got software that needs to be configured when you install it, see if you can ask those vendors or those ISVs to go in and build the interfaces in those applications. The value really isn't in the technology itself. The value is in the number of people that are using it and the number of applications that support it. So I covered what's new in Winget. We covered our release planning and processes and the way we do our themes. Covered configuration as code and why that is so impactful and valuable. A little bit about Microsoft desired state configuration versus PowerShell desired state configuration and Winget Studio. I've got a few links on here that are references. Everything that we're building is open source. Winget Studio just went open source a couple of days ago, so you're welcome to go dig around and look in there. And on the README, we've already got tutorials. I went through and made tons of screenshots and walkthroughs on this. I covered as many of the gotchas or painful points that I could so that you know what you're walking into. If you've got some ideas, would love to have pull requests on that, whether that's improving documentation or adding some functionality to the project, or just filing an issue and giving us feedback and letting us know this is something that you'd like us to continue investing in. So I've got a few minutes left. If anybody's got any questions, please head up to the microphone. And thank you so much for staying until the end of the day and watching the last session. Hopefully Ignite has been fantastic for you this year. I really appreciate everybody's time this afternoon.
So you showed us the .winget file extension and how to deploy it via Winget Studio. But if you didn't have Winget Studio, is there a command line way to install that
Absolutely.
.winget file? Yeah.
Absolutely. So the .winget extension is recognized by the app installer. That's the system component that Winget is delivered in. You can simply double-click a .winget file. That will launch your default terminal, and it will begin the configuration using Winget. It will start out giving you the overview of what the configuration is going to do. It's also going to give you that same prompt that you saw before, and it'll walk through. You can also use the Winget CLI. You can type winget configure and pass it the name of the configuration file with the path. You can disable some of the verbose outputs with that. The Winget help command will give you all of the information on that. We also have a PowerShell module that knows how to call Winget configuration, and that can be run either using start configuration, which will basically kick off the configuration and give you your prompt back, and you can check on the progress later by reattaching to the process, or you can run invoke configuration, which is more of an interactive experience. You may want to go in and do testing on these configurations in clean environments as well as in existing environments, just to make sure you didn't have any false assumptions. And one of the other things that I very commonly do, and I'll kind of bring my screen back up to show you, in this configuration is for my DevBox configuration, basically to undo everything that I did and reset. So if I wanted to uninstall something, I can simply go in with that configuration and I can say ensure absent. So if I open up the DevBox reset, I'll go in and I'll pick this Winget package here. This was for me cleaning up when I installed fonts on the system. You can see I'm using _exist as false, which actually tells Winget, make sure this is not installed. So I can do both the install and configure as well as the sort of uninstall or the reverse direction of that. I did the same thing on my main device where I have the local demo reset. And if I open that configuration file, we'll see that it's only doing a few things as well. I've got it putting the system color mode to dark and the taskbar alignment middle. I actually prefer being in light mode most of the time with things in the center, but always for presentations, if you've got something visual, like going from light mode to dark mode or moving a taskbar or something colorful, that presents really well. But ultimately where I get the most value is in not having to remember what are all the apps that I had installed and what were all of the Visual Studio extensions and VS Code extensions and all of those kinds of things. That's really where I get the value out of it.
Yeah, I have a question. So we use 𝗦𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗃𝗃 right now for the software.
You have to speak up just a little
Yeah,
bit. I don't have the head.
Oh, okay. We use 𝗦𝗃𝗃𝗃 for the software installation.
You can absolutely use 𝗦𝗃𝗃𝗃. So I mentioned the DSC community earlier. I know that 𝗦𝗃𝗃𝗃 has a DSC resource. I'm also aware the DSC community is building a 𝗦𝗃𝗃𝗃 resource. You can totally run a Winget configuration file that will leverage the 𝗦𝗃𝗃𝗃 DSC resource to install 𝗦𝗃𝗃𝗃 packages.
Okay, to install the 𝗦𝗃𝗃𝗃 packages using the winget command. So we don't need a 𝗦𝗃𝗃 agent installed on the...
It will depend. So if you're using 𝗦𝗃𝗃𝗃 today and you're using a 𝗦𝗃𝗃𝗃 repository, then you have to use that. The question would really be whether or not you've got either a private Winget repository that has everything you need in it, or if you can get that from the community or the Microsoft Store.
Okay, so we are just thinking like, Winget can be a replacement for our 𝗦𝗃𝗃𝗃 solution. So
it depends.
We install a lot of agent like a firewall agent and then SQL or Visual Studio, VC++, JDK, all those we install through our 𝗦𝗃𝗃𝗃
Absolutely. So one of our design tenets with Winget is nothing is scripted. So we don't do any pre-install or pre-deploy or post-install or post-deploy script type actions. And 𝗦𝗃𝗃𝗃 will support that. So there are some applications that you may need to do certain things before you install or after you install for it to function. Right now, that's just something I'm not interested in having Winget do as a package manager. But certainly with configuration management, you can specify dependencies, you can have those custom behaviors. It's just going to be more heavy lifting.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for the Q&A session. That was probably the first one over this Ignite. My question is it possible to add my own source? So you have MS Store, you have few others. Can I do like for internally developed apps an internal library that I can utilize, or perhaps a way for Winget to utilize config manager or Intune via API or yeah.
So Winget already has an implementation that is a private REST source. It's just using REST APIs. We've got a deployment that you can deploy it on Azure. There are some commercial offerings that offer some on-prem and some other tool chains and different stacks. You can use group policy to specify that Winget is only allowed to use your private source, and that will allow you to control the supply chain by going through and only allowing it to use packages that you've installed in your own source.
Can we leverage this with autopilot?
Couldn't hear you over the...
Can we leverage this with autopilot?
With autopilot. I don't believe you're going to be able to leverage all of the capabilities that this has with autopilot. One of the main challenges is when you're running in system context or session 0 for something like an autopilot, the Winget application itself, so winget.exe, would not be mapped in that context. You can install the PowerShell module for Winget, the Microsoft Winget client. You can call that module in that context, but where you'll run into challenges is doing things like trying to install software for the user. In the system context, there's no notion of installing a packaged application that the system context could use, and anything that requires user level install also would not work in the system context. So the common scenario I've seen there is autopilot for everything that is machine wide and everything that can be configured in that context, and then typically a logon script or a first run that would happen when the user logs in the first time to do anything that was user specific or needed to be done in that user context.